So this is the 6th year of our popular winter speaker series, 2nd year of us doing it hybrid, I believe, which is both in person and also Zoom and also recorded. So everybody will get a link to or a reminder that it's available on our YouTube channel a little bit in the future. So this is being recorded. And so a reminder to those of you on Zoom to please keep your video turned off and also your audio muted. Just a few things about what's going to be happening in 2024 before I introduce our speaker tonight. And you'll get more about all of this through our next Read All About It newsletter, but that'll be probably couple of weeks, but so you don't have to take notes. You'll be getting more about it online. We are expanding a couple of things that we started a couple of years ago, our mentoring program. We've got a new mentee here tonight, and she was just talking, Lisa, just talking about what a good thing it's been for her. Her mentor is Betty Struckoff, and she's just learning lots from her and inspired and excited about her adventure in native landscaping. So that's going to be expanding this year with more offers to mentees to participate. Also remembering our plant tags are expanding from started out with what, Sue, with about 50 and then 100, now 150 or so, and going up to 200 this year. And remember, we have an online store that you can purchase them for or to be shipped to you and or pick them up at various events. A reminder about our usual chapter programming, which you'll get dates on all of this coming up in time, but our speaker series will continue in February and March. Our garden gatherings, as usual, will occur monthly Wednesday and Saturday from April through October. Our partner events, this is kind of in the chronological order for this year. So we partner with Bring Conservation Home St. Louis Audubon, Grow Native, and Shaw Nature Reserve. So for all of these upcoming exciting events, Grow Native's first in this area will be at the Southwest Illinois Workshop, which will be Landscape Challenges and Native Plant Solutions, February 23. Our Partners for Native Landscaping, you know, that webinar series that is operated through the St. Louis County Library System. Be watching for when that starts, but I'll tell you, it starts February 20 and we'll go, 10 of them will go through March 20, but then they are all also recorded. Still, you might want to register for them. The ones you're interested in. Then our Native Landscaping Workshop by Partners for Native Landscaping, which also does those webinars. We are also doing an in-person workshop. This year it's going to be at Maryland Heights Community Center on March 23, half day in person. Lots of good speakers. And then also part of Partners for Native Landscaping, the Native Plant Sale and Fair at Beyond Housing, and that's late April. Then Shaw Spring Wildflower Market will be May 3 for members and then May 4. And the St. Louis Native Plant Garden Tour will be May 18. So lots of good stuff coming up in the spring that we'll let you know more about. New this year, a couple of new things that I want to tell you about. One is that we are helping initiate and support a new sister chapter, which is actually a re-establishment of the Southwest Illinois chapter. They existed for 2 years, starting in 2017, and now they are ready to go again. We have our chapter, being the only one in the area, you know, that it would be appropriate for Illinois. We have close to 50 Illinois members. So we are encouraging those folks to change their chapter membership so that Illinois has plenty of members, but then they will be eligible to be part of everything that we do. Similar to our sister chapter in St. Charles area. And then the other new thing that you'll be hearing more about is a monthly Zoom event that is using Bessa Schweitzer's Wildflower Garden Planner as a structure. For each month, there will be a few short presentations of information and also comments and question and answer about that month's specific topics using Bessa's book as a, like I say, as a structure. So Penny's holding it up back there and they are for sale here. Somebody also told me that they're for sale at Powder Valley now. You don't have to have them to participate in these Zoom experiences that will start in February, but it's nice to be able to review the month and then have someplace to write notes about what you learn during the Zoom event. So just some of the new things that'll be happening this year. And now, any questions or, Sue wanted to mention to those of you who are here and also those out there, maybe you need to come up here real quick, Sue, to be heard by those out there.
It's HB, House Bill 1555.
Come over here. Come over here where the camera is.
House Bill 1855 to prevent the sale and intentional distribution of burning bush, calorie pear, honeysuckle, winter creeper, and Frisella Landscape, which probably doesn't affect most of you, but it's a big problem elsewhere in the state. Please contact your representative, your state representative, and let them know that you support this. The hearing is sometime next week, so thank you.
I got another email from Missouri Prairie Foundation, and they contradicted the bill number. They have an HB 2412, and I don't. But I got the other one in 1555.
Okay, so HB 2412 is what they're calling it now.
2412.
As bills work their way through the legislature, they do get changed. So but if you contact your state legislator and let them know that you're supporting the bill promoting the sale of invasive species, that will do it. Okay.
No, that's not important. If you contact the state legislature and you wish your email to be effective, you need to cite the specific bill number.
But if it's wrong, what happens?
The House bound. The 1224 could be a Senate version and thus have a different number.
What does she have in front of that 2412? Is it?
It just says breaking news, and this is the second email I got from them. The other one said 1555, but it says the Missouri Invasive Plant Bill HB 2412 may have a public hearing on January 22nd.
Okay, so maybe mention both of them, HB 1555 or 2412. Your legislator will find it. No, I'm sorry, did I say that? Cease the sale and intentional distribution of those plants.
Can people go to Grow Native's website and
Yes,
see
well,
specifics there?
I don't know. I was looking on the website and I couldn't find it, but if you Google Missouri, what did you Google?
Missouri Legislature Invasive Plant Act, and that's what.
And it came up, so.
Maybe we can.
But it's still calling it 1555, so.
You know what?
Your voice does make a difference, so don't be afraid, just one sentence is all that email has to be.
Yeah, I sent an email to the legislator today and you got a response from her.
There's quite a few different ones on PSIC.com about invasive plants.
Thank you. Good. So now my pleasure to introduce Michael Garrett. You go by Mike, right? Um, and just a very quick introduction. Many of you probably read this on our little email reminder about this. Career in forestry, ecology, and design. Served as Director of Horticulture at the historic Bellefontaine Cemetery. Bellefontaine, right? I mean, that I work hard to call it that instead of Bell Fountain. And Arboretum, most significantly, right? And you helped bring that organization to accreditation as an arboretum. You tell us more about that, maybe. Okay. Currently working with Frisella Landscape Group with a BS in Forestry from Southern Illinois University and a Master of Landscape Architecture from University of Illinois Champaign Urbana. Mike, come talk to us about oaks in Missouri.
Thank you much. All right. I feel like the presentation was a little like short and like unofficially incompleted, I'll just say. It's briefly just oaks. So I kind of want to keep this as like an open conversation and to open it up to any questions and kind of see where it goes. Certainly there are some slides beyond this first one, but everybody's got, different ideas about oaks and stuff like that. So I want to talk about them. Oaks don't live in a bubble, they live in a plant community and stuff. So the conversation and the dialogue between them is really as important as the species themselves. But I was thinking about this presentation and standing up in front of a crowd over here, I was like, I probably should have a hook about what I'm going to say. Probably should have some kind of introduction. So just couldn't figure out anything. Just nothing was ringing a bell. Nothing was coming in. And I got the TV on, and then there was some, this time of the year, we're going into an election year, a lot of clowns and clown stuff happening. I was about ready to turn off the channel button, and then I had a moment. I was like, wait a minute, this is it. Like, this is perfect. Like, this is kind of level of inspiration. I never thought about myself as like a politician, and I'm not announcing like candidacy for anything anytime soon, but because I'm like the worst salesman. And the one thing I can guarantee is I'm not going to make any promises. And that's kind of antithetical to like what politicians do. So I get, these moments where I'm standing around and everybody's trying to push an idea about like what's the best and who's got the greatest ideas and which way we want to take it and this and that. And I'm like, this is, the whole conversation is just wonderful. It's interesting. But we're missing the point. Like we're trying to, everybody's pushing like towards one particular thing. And if I'm going to draw parallels with trees, like everybody's got ideas about, which tree like is the best, which one should we be planting? Does anybody here have a favorite tree? Oaks? Okay, that's not a tree. Many trees, right? Or like a particular plant or something like that. You're like, I wouldn't plant a garden without including this one in there. Like that's always the one. I'm like, that's great. And like, I kind of have my faves too. But at the other side of me, the other like thought process of my brain is thinking, wait a minute, like, I don't want to just have one. Like, we should have them all. We should have all these ideas coming through. And that's the only way that these kind of systems work. So trees have to kind of, they can't live in a bubble. They have to kind of share the world with everything else. So that's what makes them unique. And that's what makes them really special. And ultimately like successful too, is that they can share that space. And I'll click this more. And is this not working? Which way am I supposed to point it? Okay.
Let me try.
It is on. I think so. Oh, there we go. Did you do that or is that me?
I did.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's what makes it all successful and make things kind of work. Shared communities and many ideas coming together. And I'm not trying to like turn like plants into people and anthropogenicize like the plant world and stuff like that. But it does kind of help to sell the whole idea and kind of push things forward You know, and that's where kind of oaks come from. I look at oaks as like one of those like plant groups that really, you know, is like this like megalithic, like, you know, giant like point of inspiration and like all-knowing wisdom and strength and unity and character and subtlety and grace and all that stuff. And I kind of have my own visions about how that kind of works out too. But there are many other visions of oaks and stuff too. Surprisingly, like and similar with the parallels of like politics and stuff like that, looking back at like previous like presidents and stuff, there's never been any like presidents have had like oak nicknames or plant nicknames. I think the closest we've ever gotten has been hickory, you know, old hickory. Yeah, or young hickory. Polk. Young hickory, I think it was Polk, is like a protege to Jackson, you know, years after his presidency. And then, you know, of course we got Abe. We got the man had many nicknames, one of which is the rail splitter. And although that doesn't like equally like, you know, get to oak, like the man chopped down a lot of trees in his lifetime, and he admitted to every single one of them. You know, he certainly got the name rail splitter from growing up in the hills of Kentucky and stuff like that, and homesteading and stuff, and making fences and splitting rails, and then taking that moniker with him to, you know, the country lawyer shop and arguing court cases and, you know, working his way up into politics and stuff. So, but no oaks yet. Maybe we'll get there one day. But anyway, for as long as the U.S. has been around, oaks got that, you know, many years, many decades, and millions of years beyond that. So oaks as a group are pretty interesting, and I'm particularly just fascinated with them as part of a plant world. So oaks are pretty old. The lineage of oaks goes back very, very long time ago. Scientists could date like the early predecessors of oaks. It's about like 50 plus million years ago. 56 million years ago. So those are like the predecessors for what we think about oaks is right now. You know, this is 10 million years after the big asteroid dropped down and you know, outside the Yucatan and like wiped out the whole planet's ecosystems and restarted the whole biological clock and speciation and diversity and stuff like that. But oaks quickly speciated after that period of time. About 33 million years ago, there was a major split amongst the oaks, where the oaks kind of, you know, had a common ancestor, and they divested into basically like two large groups. And in many cases in plant taxonomy, you find out like when plants like split off and you get this like evolutionary like split, something generally kind of takes over and starts like becoming the dominant one, and kind of the other one slowly scoots off and kind of moves off to the side. But that didn't really happen with oaks. Instead of having a split in competition and, you know, and retribution taking place, they kind of learned to work together. So they took their parallels off of occupying the same territories and complementing each other and playing off each other's strengths and weaknesses to both occupy the same space in cohabitation. So we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. In total, the oaks are a pretty big group. So Quercus, the genus, has about 450 species worldwide, and that's pretty much found in the northern hemisphere. So North America has quite a few. We've got about 90 in the United States, and a fairly large group of diversity also in Mexico. And then within the Western Hemisphere, oaks go about down to the equator. So right around like Ecuador, they kind of split off. So no other oaks south of that. Quite a bit of diversity. Of course, oaks also live in the northern hemisphere, in Asia, Europe, and there's a lot of diversity out there too. Still not working. Oh, here we go. Okay. So that's kind of the big global picture. You know, there's a lot of details and stuff into that, and we go a little bit deeper if you got specific questions. But when we get closer to home, you know, where we're at here in Missouri, things get a little bit more simple. We've got about 22 oak species in the state. 21 of those are native, and one is a naturalized species. but 21 species, none of which are really considered to have any kind of threatened or endangered status. They're very common. They're like, just about everywhere, and they occupy a lot of, specific niches, and they fill a lot of, roles and stuff. And again, they play off to each other's strengths and betterment. So very abundant, very diverse, and range throughout the state, throughout the various ecosystems and plant communities. It's truly, by all stretch of the words, a keystone species in our forests. Without oaks, there would be a lot less everything else. So if you think about all the relationships that they have to other plants and animals and stuff like that, this is an organism which offers so many other direct and ancillary benefits to so much other life. And we can include things like, like insects, all the other arthropods, fungi, plants, other specific animals living in the same ecosystems, just so much more. I think everybody here is probably very familiar with Doug Tallamy and, his like great eco-revelatory work in his research, in his labs and stuff like that. He's come up with the Lepidoptera index. At this point, I think it's over like 556 or something species of Lepidoptera directly associated and supported by oaks. And that's just one order of insects. So amongst the other like 24 orders of insects, there's so much more. Certainly Lepidoptera have directly like evolved alongside oaks in this like 30 to 50 million year pace, where they've co-evolutionary like developed with the oaks and mine. Before that, though, we've got a lot of other insects, a lot of other things like beetles and flies, dipterans, and other organisms that certainly stand under the shade of oak trees. It's a tremendous like organism and set of organisms, and the fact that it's such a big presence, but it provides habitat for things like birds which nest in their cavities, insects that live in the soil underneath them. And then, insects that directly like feed off the leaves and other, saps and stuff from the oak trees. And then, for our more charismatic organisms like our deer and turkey and stuff that are abundant throughout the state, certainly all the mass that oak trees do provide, provides a tremendous amount of substance for some of these animals. So acorns, has anybody ever tried to eat an acorn? What do you think? Any good? Shaker pins aren't bad. Yeah, you can eat them. Yeah, it's a pretty like pretty intense like experience. It's for generally speaking, like acorns are very dense. They're full of starches. There's tons of proteins in them. Even like omega-3s and stuff like that. They're really, really loaded. Red oaks in particular, they're like really, really loaded with like nutritious things. But the other problem about it is that there's also a lot of tannins and stuff like that, so which make them a little bit unpalatable. But there's ways of working that out and stuff. And nature has its own way of making that kind of work out. Usually the thing is for like most foods, it's like if it tastes bad, it's probably pretty good for you. If it tastes really good, it's maybe a little less so. So it's I consider it to be like a superfood, and it comes at the right time of the year, right? So acorns start maturing in September, October. They start dropping out of the trees, and everybody starts picking them up. All the mammals and stuff start to harvest them. The birds, the blue jays and stuff start to gather them and cache them over the winter time. The oak trees are perfectly timed. Most organisms like eat the white oaks first, so the white oak group gets consumed. They're a little less, they have a little less tannins in them, but they have a little less omega-3s and 6s and stuff in them. So they're pretty like quick, easy meals to stock up on. And then all the red oaks, which have all those like tannins and stuff, can sit on the forest floor and slowly leach their tannins like throughout the rest of the winter, and then they'll get consumed a little bit later in the season. It works out pretty well. But above all, like all these like big ideas and the foods, evolution and stuff like that, these are long-lived species. they have a place, at the top of the food chain. So how do we get to be this diverse and to be all this, all encompassing and stuff like that? How did this all kind of fall out, and how do we start to understand this and make, sense out of this whole big picture? There's a lot to it. A lot of folks in the state have put a lot of attention towards, to studying organisms and ecosystems, and finding ways to classify them and put them in, boxes and sort things out. And I think learning about oaks, this is one of the tools you can use to like understand them and kind of truly appreciate them for where they lay and what they're capable of doing. This is a really good place to start. This quote although it does cite both trees, forests, within the quote, it was never intended to talk about trees, but it works so well for trees in this regards. But trees are kind of interesting. They occupy different spaces and different levels. And I think this chart for me, like, kind of helps to break things down a little bit. We've got these big, classifications of plants and where you might find them, particularly like our trees and our oaks and stuff. We've got forests, we've got woodlands. I know I'm reading right to left, open woodlands and savannas. And then beyond that, where the trees get thinner, we've got our prairie ecosystems, we got our aquatic ecosystems and stuff. But we're starting off from like few trees to many trees. And this is kind of an interesting way to see, to understand like forest density and how trees grow and what happens like to those organisms and all those other outside organisms that live within them. So as you get more trees, you get more trees per acre. We generally see trees get a little bit taller. They get a little bit more height because they're growing in competition and they're trying to, reach above the competition and get a leg up on the competition. Forests, soils get a little bit cooler. So usually moisture starts to accumulate a little bit. And that's also a consequence of, more trees being supported by more moisture and stuff too. So generally a little bit forest soils and stuff are associated with like thicker soils, higher moisture levels and stuff. The potential for higher quality of timber values definitely goes up with forests. You get taller trees with straighter trunks, more choice pickings, I guess, for the timber market. And more vertical diversity too. So as things get a little bit taller, there's more layers within the forest, and there's more like opportunities for understory plants to develop. Things like, your flowering dogwoods and your hornbeams and hop hornbeams and stuff like that. More chances those things can really envelop and find their own particular niche in the forest floor underneath them. Another way of really taking a bigger picture about this is understanding oaks and within our state is looking at the statewide geographic distribution of water and soils and topography throughout the state. So two maps over here. They look pretty similar, and they kind of speak the same language. Like they're kind of different figures. So the map on our left represents average annual precipitation throughout the state. Yes, there's a big difference between northwestern Missouri and northeastern Missouri. Inches and inches of difference, and it's pretty clear too. And it makes things pretty easy to understand. Where all the water goes to. And then on the right, this shows off our ecoregions throughout the state. We've got just a couple big ecoregions, but there's a huge difference between northern Missouri and southern Missouri. So we look at northern Missouri. I guess this is like a red or orange up here. This is an area that was pretty heavily influenced by the glaciers and stuff that occurred, over 10,000 years ago, over several iterations, knocking, and leveling the soils down and getting uplift in the ground before that. And more soils being brought in from the north and water washing all the soils away. And then as the glaciers retreated, like vegetation started to fill in the spaces behind it. And then we get down into southern Missouri, that never happened. So we got a way different soil types, and that influence that we saw up north with leveling and pushing back and receding and changing never really happened. So, the soils are like more eroded, generally a little thinner in a lot of areas. Different kinds of plant communities are definitely filling in those spaces. And then the other like really big one is down in the Boot Heel in southeastern Missouri, totally different. This falls into the coastal plains ecoregion, which is more like related to any of the southern forests and any of the forests you find along the Mississippi River that flow all the way down to the Gulf, that have more in common than they do with certainly the rest of the state of Missouri. So quite a bit of difference, but you can see there's patterns here, where all the water goes. It falls into, particular soil types and those, those characteristics stay. And because of all these different, conditions, because different soils and different, amounts of precipitation and climate influences and stuff, plants kind of fill in the spaces and start to adapt to all those changes. Yeah.
What is the precipitation? I can't read
Oh.
what the colors are.
Yeah, I could barely read them too from over here. so you can see in the down in the southern part of the state, we're kind of falling into this like teal range over here. That's like 40s, like mid 40 inches per year. Maybe gets above like 50 in a couple of years. But yeah, on average, you get like 40s, like 45, up to 50 inches per year. And then on the upper end over here in this orange range, it's like, under 36. So we're like upper 30s in this range over here. Then you start getting like closer to 40s, mid 40s, and then like down to 50s. And that's not every year, right? This changes. And it certainly has changed in the last couple of decades and the last 100 years, really, but certainly more so in the last couple of decades. So if we get a year when you get 60 inches of rain, that really kind of skews the averages and changes the overall, understanding of those big pictures. But generally, these are based on like 30-year averages when they come up with these graphs. So where that falls, like you got all these elements like kind of laying things down, soils, building and then getting washed away and eroded, and various kinds of topography throughout the state. Something has got to grow on that space. Something is going to fill in the blanks and find a way to thrive off of it. And that's where like the speciation comes into play. Like, what are you good at doing? Where are you going to thrive the best? Like as your genetics like have unfolded and unraveled over the course of 30 million years, like what are you good at doing? Like any other like occupation or something like that. It's find something that you're good at doing and just stick with it. Like you're going to be doing that for the rest of your life for a long time. So do what you do good and keep doing it. And oaks have figured that out. They don't have much of a choice, but they've kind of figured things out. So back to that big division of oaks that occurred like 30 million years ago. In North America, we kind of evolved where that big split kind of stuck to its like roots. And we've got these two large groups of oaks. Simply we've got our black oak group or the red oak group, and then the white oak group. So these two large groups that, kind of provide the structure for all the species within them. And again, I mentioned earlier, there's like 21 native species. Within that, there's about 13 trees in the red black oak group and about 8 species in the white oak group. And there are some big differences. There are also a lot of similarities between, both groups and all the species that fall within this umbrella. I think this is probably not new to many folks. Is this newer material? Okay. So the red oak group, they generally have these like bristly tips to the leaves. If you've seen an oak tree, you get familiar with an oak tree. This is kind of, what you kind of look at it as a typical leaf. But on the apexes or the tips of all these lobes, the blacks have like little bristly tips on them. So they come out to a little bit of a point. They've got acorns that mature after 2 growing seasons. So the first year they flower and they produce small acorns that hang on the tips of the branches. At this point of the year, the oaks that flowered from this last spring, are about a quarter of an inch, maybe like 3/8 of an inch or so. And then they will finally mature the following year. So this oak's acorns will mature and fall off the trees next October. So 2 growing seasons. When they do fall on the ground, they require a cold stratification period to germinate. So they've got to sit and wait through that another year before they finally germinate in the following springtime. So it takes them a long time to really get going and get established. Good planning, thinking ahead, right? Generally, they have more tannins in those acorns, and as well as the fruit, there's the fruit and the wood, most of the plant parts. The wood is generally a little less decay resistant, so they tend not to be as long lived. If you look at the red oak like wood itself, they've got it's a ring porous species. All oaks are ring porous. So when they grow the first year, they put out these like very large like vessels in the springtime. And think about it as like a bundle of like drinking straws. So all the wood in that bundle of drinking straws is wide open, and it just lets water move and flow up and down in that wood, and it stays open. But it's kind of loose, and it has this open structure, so it's not completely watertight. Doesn't resist like decay like white oak does as much, and not quite used for the same structural purposes. Throughout the state, red oaks, harvested widely, used for all kinds of economic purposes, lumber, furniture wood, low grade, wood for pallets and stuff like that too, charcoal, you name it. Like, red oak can do it, but not as well as what they use white oak for. Get to that in a second. So looking at the white oak group, our leaves are generally like rounded on the apices. So if you look at this bur oak leaf, they've got all these like rounded areas, and that's pretty true throughout the whole section as well. Their acorns, on the other hand, mature after 1 growing season. So they will flower in the year, they will mature in the year, and they will fall off in the fall time, and they can germinate almost immediately. So they germinate without that cold stratification period. So as soon as they hit the ground, they're lucky if they can get knocked around or stashed in the soil somewhere where they're gonna send out a little root in the fall time and be ready to go the following year. They'll take off and hopefully make it up to that canopy layer, at some point in their lives. The wood is more decay resistant, and that's because unlike the red oak group, which has those like hollow tubes and those large vessels open, white oaks have the same set of bundles of vessels, but within each like drinking tube or each of those straws is this like membrane. It's called tylosis, and it provides a level of decay resistance and water tightness that the red oaks don't have. So white oaks, their commercial value extends to the same processes that red oaks do. You can use them for, furniture wood, structural wood. You can also use them for other like highly valued things that in Missouri are particularly strong in. So cooperage, building barrels. So if you've ever had, right, if you ever had like an oak aged like port, wine, beer, spirits and stuff like that, it's been aged in white oak. Missouri, and amongst the world's like cooperage industries, particularly, is really it kind of stands out amongst itself. I've talked to many folks in different areas of the globe, and people have heard of Missouri white oak. It's really preferred in a lot of places. So even if you were to go down to Argentina and go to a winery down there where they don't have any native oaks at all, and you go into their cellars, looking for what they're storing their oaks in, probably going to be out of some Missouri white oak. So white oak from Missouri will be a little bit different than white oak like in Massachusetts or white oak in any other state. Always going to have a little bit of difference, and I think vintners and winemakers kind of know this, right? Like, so it's not like they're looking for something to stick their fluids in. Like, they're looking for something that's going to give something back. It's going to add a little bit of character. And it goes back to that other compound in the wood, like tannins. that really adds that like layer of flavor and like unique attributes, to that particular liquor or whatever it happens to be, that are going to make it like shine. And throughout the world, like Missouri's kind of been noted as one of those like very even flavors. It's not too strong. It's pretty subtle, adds a little like butteriness to it. And it just really, really works. So, vintners like blend barrels with, French oak and Missouri white oak and other, oak species to get like the flavors that they ultimately want. So good of us. And of course, other things that make oak famous is, that wood being used for, for like shipbuilding and other practical uses where you need something strong, durable, and watertight. Cool. So we got quite a few oaks. We've got a lot of diversity in the state, and it's really tremendous. This is kind of the point where I want to just talk about what oaks we have and kind of introduce them to you and kind of just discuss them a little bit more. This is like back to like my like candidate like stump speech, so like, anybody from Iowa here? So like back to the caucusing thing, right? This is the point where like somebody stands up and, says like, my candidate like always washes their ears every day and, never cursed in front of a lady before or whatever happens to be. Like, I want to sell every one of these trees, but at the same time, I'm not selling any one in particular. I want to sell them all. I tell you, each one of them is great and unique amongst themselves. So while we have all that diversity and all that, those really kind of unique species and stuff out there, this is a very short list. And I just kind of picked these ones out as like, these are the common ones out there. These are the ones that you're gonna, that you probably see like on your, maybe not tonight, but maybe like on your ride to work tomorrow or something. Chances are you're going to drive past like half of this list at some point. So you're going to see these around. These are very common species. Like they're, like the working trees are not the most rare species out there. They're doing it, but they're making their way in the world, and they're all places, but they don't, take over or anything like that too. They don't want to speak too loud. So a couple in the red black oak group, and then a couple in the white oak group. So we're just going to kind of thumb through it. If anybody wants to talk about pin oaks, for sure, like let's talk about pin oaks, but I want to just talk about these because they're so wonderful. Yep. So white oak, this is the white oak. So we just talked about, barrels and cooperage and stuff like that. This is the one. This is kind of the king of the oaks. If there could be a placeholder on the top. It's the #1 tree in the state of Missouri. We've got more white oaks than just about any other single species of oaks. They're commonplace. They're everywhere, and they're very adaptable. Like there's things that make them kind of unique, but and overall, like they've got an ability to kind of shape and kind of fall into just about any other like forest area that you can think of on average, like on the even side of things. You're not going to find white oak, growing up above the swamps, down by the river. You're not going to find them, on the driest hilltop down in the Ozarks, but anywhere else in between those two, like white oak could probably do it. Anybody fortunate enough to have a white oak in your front yard or backyard on your property? It's one tree that we gotta hold on to. This time of the year in the wintertime, like white oak really kind of shines. It's got this like platy, light gray bark, that in the wintertime, with blue skies and like the sun coming through at the right moment, it just kind of brightens it up and makes it look, bigger and gleaming, and it gives it like a whole kind of unique character. It's branching and structure on old specimens is like really robust, but it's kind of diverse too. It comes in so many different forms and shapes and stuff, depending on where you find it, where it's growing at. When they leaf out in the springtime, The foliage is a little bit more like blue green cast. So they really sort of stand out, amongst other trees, and oaks included, on the, hillsides and forests and stuff. So they have this, kind of character about them that you kind of pick them out. You kind of see them even from a distance, just by the color alone, really stand out. So the leaves are, fairly evenly lobed. Like any other oak tree, the ID features on them are really crazy. And I don't want to talk too much about identification here. We don't have to, like the 7 hours required to all these species and go through them. But the leaves are pretty much average. When you think about what an oak looks like, that's kind of it, like in my mind too. The variability amongst the canopy is going to be great too. So the leaves on the top of the tree are going to be a little bit different than the ones on the bottom of the tree, or the mid side of the canopy. And that's just depending on which side it's on and how much light it's capturing through. A lot of oak trees have thinner leaves on the tops. So you'll have kind of a thinner leaf with deeper lobes in it. And that just allows more light to get into the inside of the canopy, into the lower leaves. They're not tremendously dense, so they do let a lot of light through them, even in densely forested areas. That provides light to other plants in the spaces below. So they're good folks to have around, good compatriots. In the fall time, we can often get really good fall color out of white oaks too. Many oaks, aren't totally reliable for fall color. Though it can be a kind of a unique, attribute about placing oaks in the landscape, or just, working with what's already over there. I think at best, when white oaks get that purplish color, they can get this kind of maroon colored in the landscape. It's pretty intense and it looks great. It's not really bright, but it is subtle, and it stands and it develops later in the fall season. So, amongst all the other browns and, russet colors in the fall landscape, they just pop. You got this really beautiful burgundy color. Like I said, white oaks are pretty adaptable. So they're going to find them in various different forest plant communities. So they tend to fall into these that middle range. So you'll find them in drier soils to somewhat mesic soils. So dry to kind of medium soil conditions. They tend to favor those well drained upland soils. And then anything that within that range. So they don't like it too dry. If it gets too dry, they tend to falter out, and other species tend to do a little bit better in those conditions. But they like it well in the middle. Like I said, oaks don't take the stage all by themselves. But they're like anything else. They're good social creatures, and they share that space well with other plant material. Trees are social organisms, so they're the roots of white oak trees will graft with other oak trees, other white oak trees, and exchange nutrients and water with other organisms or other oak trees. They'll play pretty well together. In these kind of forested or heavy wooded, dense wooded conditions, you'll often find other other species like hickories. Oak hickory forests are synonymous with the central hardwood forests. So that includes things like shagbark hickory or mockernut hickory. Pretty common species too. As well as things like northern red oak. Northern red oak we'll get to in a minute. It's basically synonymous with a forest. It's kind of a unique species. And then also in our forest, we've got other species like sugar maple, sometimes beech, white ash, as another upland species. These are the big players, and they form the canopy that kind of fills up that space above all the other organisms underneath. In the mid layer of these forested conditions locally around here, you'll find things like American hop hornbeam. Is anybody familiar with American hop hornbeam? Pretty common plant. They tend to do really well in drier soil conditions. and pretty common and abundant in our areas. I think that's a plant that more people ought to be using in landscape conditions. So again, kind of small, medium-sized tree, kind of falls into that like ornamental tree size class. And you know, doesn't have any like remarkably like bright flowers or anything like that. It's a wind pollinated species, but just fills in the space and like has, you know, unique branching character and you know, provides structure and seeds and things like that for wildlife. So pretty cool plant. Also other things like viburnums. We've got the black haw and rusty black haw viburnums locally around here. Also things like fragrant sumac and other vines too. Think about vines in the forest that are really important growing up the sides of these trees, you know, poison ivy, you know, great notorious plant, but like a really good, you know, species for wildlife. Right? And then depend on like, you know, if you're like making a cake or something like that, you know, you got your base ingredients and then you got, you know, some secondary ingredients and then something to put on the top, all the other organisms that fall within this, you know, this big plant community. So if this is a forest, and if we're talking about a forest, a reminder here, you know, that's a very dense system, more trees, closed canopy. And because it's got a closed canopy, that once the trees leaf out, they basically shut out all the light to the forest beneath that. Anything that grows in that space below that has to be able to take advantage of that, you know, month period before the leaves fell in and close it off. So in forested conditions, you know, with these cooler conditions and higher moisture levels, we get things like you know, wild sweet william, blue phlox, violets, trilliums, bloodroot, fall Solomon seal, and trout lilies, and all kinds of other ephemerals and stuff that pop up. And then, you know, once the canopy closes off in the late springtime, you know, things kind of get quiet again, and we go back to this like kind of cool season, like kind of plant community. So we don't see a lot of flowering, a lot of growth out of these plants throughout the rest of the year. Next, and really kind of abundant in the region is our post oak. Post oak, it's kind of I think it's a really a commendable species. It's got a wide native range. Are we familiar with post oaks? You can't miss them. Like they're just the character and the strength of their branching and this like very open branching habit to them really kind of stands out. In some cases, you know, they've got so much open character, even healthy, like vigorous looking ones, they look like they have more branches than they do leaves. You know, they put on a lot of wood and they've got a lighter character to them. But they're tremendous though. Really, really tremendous. They've got a range that extends like well out to, you know, Texas, and they go up north a little bit, down to the southeast. Like they dominate a good portion of the eastern US and a little beyond into the southwest too. So really, really tough plants. Post oaks are pretty easy to spot out. They've got these really thick leaves, thick, you know, durable leaves, often kind of a, you know, glossy coating on the outside, kind of dermal layer of the leaves. And they've got this kind of cruciform shape to them, so kind of cross shape. Really, really stand out. Bottom side of them are kind of a light dull green. So it adds a nice little bit of character and differentiation between the top glossy and the bottom side of the leaf. Pretty neat tree. With a name like post oak, you know it was used for something, right? So what do you think post oaks are used for? We want to take a guess? It's a good or bad thing, all right? So if we named like a person like seat warmer, it like kind of, you know, you make some assumptions about maybe the person's like work ethic or something, but post oak was named, it's pretty good at making posts. Like, well, what else does it do? Well, it's really good at making posts. That's about it. Post oak is a really, really tough wood. They grow really, really slow. So the wood is like very dense. If you cut into a post oak or look at a post oak, cut them apart like cross sections, the rings are really, really often like really tight together. It's a slow growing tree, takes a long time to get to, you know, any substantial size. It's really kind of gnarly, like knotty. And unless like you're looking at the lower part of a handful of trunks and stuff, they really just kind of twist over and arch off in a different direction. So not a lot of straight wood, and never really been marketed and used all that much like commercially as like a timber or species, which is just fine, right? It's good at other things. It's got this, great habitat that it provides, and its long life and ability to grow in locations where few other trees could really like thrive in. So, I think we would have done better besides post oak, but somebody went with post oak, and that's what we're kind of sticking to. So tough wood, very rot resistant, very durable. And if you can muster getting one of these things open and cracking it open, probably like Abe Lincoln did, on his multiple homesteads that he farmed in, it would make a really nice post. Post oak is kind of unique and how tough that it could be, and how really adaptable it really is. In the St. Louis region, we've got some diversity in our forest communities and stuff like that, and we've got a lot of post oaks around. They're all over the place. I'll take a guess that in 100 years from now, like half of those post oaks will be there. 200 years from now, in the St. Louis region, we won't have any post oaks. It take a long time to get like established to be of a certain size. And, in a region like St. Louis County, like there's so much, there's such a high population number, and we've got, homes and, industry all over the place. This tree is particularly kind of like pushed off to the side, and it's kind of lost its ability to thrive in the particular landscapes. If you do have a post oak on your property, anybody here? Everybody, yeah, a few people. Hold on to those things. Take care of them. As an arborist, people I've worked on people's properties and given it in a lot of cases advice and consultation about how to manage post oak trees. And I usually tell people they're like old men. Just leave them the hell alone. Stay away from them. They're one tree that's like, if it could talk, I know their words would be, get off my lawn, or like, something like that. So they don't like disturbance, which is fine. You got to respect these trees. Like most oak trees, you got to really respect, the tree, the trunk, and the branches, everything that you could see above ground. But like more importantly, like really respect what's underneath the soil and what's below ground. They don't like that disturbance. They don't like to be trampled on, or cut, severing roots and stuff like that. So tread lightly onto that ground. And this one in particular, it doesn't really do well if somebody puts an irrigation system in it and puts like a shade garden in underneath it, or builds homes like too close to it. That could cause a lot of issues like soil compaction and loss of root systems, and that stuff's pretty critical to have. On the other side of that thing, and somewhat contradictory, this tree kind of surprises me in a lot of different ways. So when you see this tree in different like forest communities and plant communities, it's often associated with particular like forest or woodland plant community called flatwoods. Has anybody heard of that one before? So flatwoods are kind of interesting plant communities. They're generally flat, as the name would suggest. And they're usually, in most cases, are uplands. There could be some bottomland flatwoods, but they're generally uplands. So think about, like an elevated plain, like a flat plateau on top of a feature within the landscape. And because it's flat, water doesn't easily drain from that area. So these particular areas, they tend to get really wet in the wintertime, and the water table tends to elevate and pick up. And then the springtime, we get all those rains that starts to develop, and it really, really stays like at a higher water table and higher elevation. So you get this like heavy, like soggy soil, which really prevents like roots from really taking into the ground. So it makes the soil like anaerobic. You don't get a lot of oxygen in it. And because of that, you get like a lot of layers of silt and clays that develop because of the soils are breaking down and like oxidizing and settling in. So you get this very heavy, dense, like fragipan layer. So it's like a layer of compacted soils and clays and stuff that form like just below the surface layer. So it makes it very difficult for for plants to grow and to thrive in. Yet, however, like the post oak found a way to work into this system and do very well. In other areas, you also find post oaks in like very well drained areas, like dry areas and savanna conditions, you know, where other trees would really struggle to survive and thrive upon. So, you know, it's pretty adaptable. It really takes it slow. It's a very slow growing species, but really, really tremendous. And so I give a lot of respect to good old post oak. You know, and its various plant communities, wherever it grows, you know, happens to be a pretty straight trunk over here, but it'll it'll grow alongside other oak trees. Blackjack oak is pretty common in Missouri as well. Didn't make our list tonight. Black hickory, black oak, other species too. And then in these plant communities where you get much more open canopy layer that develops and allows more sun to come through and kind of filter through the canopy, you get like a little bit more warmer season, you know, plants that thrive in those conditions. So it allows for plants to develop and to flower later into the season. So we start to see some like grasses and other plants that really get a little bit taller and diversity a little bit more too. So things like little blue stem, brambles like blackberries and stuff, wood asters, a bunch of those, various sedge species, cinquefoil, Indian physic, and a bunch of other plants. Okay, so now we're moving into the lowlands. We spent a lot of time in the upland plant communities. Let's look at, you know, some of these beautiful plants from the bottoms, like really, you know, low points in the state. Bur oak is the kind of the top dog in that classification. You're all familiar with bur oak, I hope. Yeah, everybody should be. It's one of those trees that when you think like keystone species, like that's the picture that, you know, most people think about, like big, you know, tree. I mean, this should be on a, you know, the nickel or something. It just deserves a spot like where it really stands out is like the icon, right? Future presidents, like old bur oak, you know, the 50th president, you know. So those big trees that just, you know, fill in and dominate, you know, amongst other species below. Pick it up a little bit here. In Missouri, bur oak is kind of like known as a bottomland species, but many other landscapes like Illinois and like north in their range and stuff, they're also synonymous with other forested areas and upland conditions. Bur oak leaves are tremendous. We tend to get leaves in Missouri kind of like this, where you got this fairly large leaf. Some bur oak leaves can get quite large, and they have this kind of scallop tip to them, and then otherwise kind of you know, lobed in the bottom side. Bur oak obviously gets its names from its fairly large acorns. So when you think of burrs, these are the burrs on the trees. Also known as a mossy cap oak. Some of the bur oak acorns can get up to 2 inches in diameter. So pretty tasty if you're a squirrel. So we got a bottomland species, but you'll find them growing in other, you know, woodland areas, into like up, you know, midpoints of slopes and stuff and forests. They grow alongside swamp white oaks, pecans, kingnut hickory, American elms, green ash, you know, other common bottomland species. Hope everybody is, do you guys recognize this tree? If anybody's in the Columbia area, stop by you recognize.
Been out there several times.
Yeah. It's again, this is on a coin somewhere for sure. This is the McBain bur oak. It's 400-year-old oak tree. You know, go check it out. definitely worth your time. But in these conditions and these, like, you know, kind of open savannas and woodlands and stuff, we get warmer season species too. So, and cool ones as well, like Virginia wild rye, creek oats, sedges, and then other savanna species like purple coneflower. Chinkapin oak. You know, chinkapin oak like is a not a very common species in like locally in this region, but if you get out into the St. Louis County and St. Charles County, you kind of start to see this one on some of those like dry rocky ridge tops and hillsides, you know, southwest sides and stuff like that. Their leaves are kind of unique. They've got this kind of unusual shape and pattern to them. Oftentimes in drier rocky conditions, they're not going to grow very large. They're going to be kind of squatty, kind of short, multi-trunked, and have a little bit more character and architecture in the branches and stuff. But they definitely thrive in those conditions. So we associate chinkapin with dry, rocky upland woodlands. And they've got the ability to tolerate limestone soils and these like dolomitic limestone soils more better than many other species. So this is kind of their niche. Although if you've put them in, you know, thick soils and rich soils and stuff, they could get, you know, 70, 80, 90 foot tall and do quite well. Chinkapin oak grows alongside white oak, black oak, and then also blue ash locally in St. Charles County too. And in these areas, you know, we get a whole mix of very unique species. So you'll see things like Carolina buckthorn, flowering dogwood, sedges, you know, and then many other flowering species. I'll bump it up a little bit. So finally, I'm going to get through 2 red oaks here. I just want to reintroduce you to. We've got red oak and black oak. Both of them, you know, on first glance, most people really can't tell the difference between the two of them, but they are unique, and they do share a lot of kingdoms and worlds, but they have places where they just do better in amongst themselves. Black oak is probably our like number 2 oak species in the state. It's very common. It grows all over the place. And it is very adaptable. It's a very unique tree. If you put it in thick soils, like deep, rich soils, it'll go straight tall and get 90 foot tall, and it can get a massive trunk, just huge trees, big trees. And then you could also put the same species or find them located growing on some scrappy hillside, like next to a glade in the Ozarks, and they'll be 15 foot tall and like 50 years like old, like, and, you know, in a 10-inch diameter tree. So they've got this tremendous ability to adapt and to, like, you know, figure it out. They just grow a little slower in those tough areas. Very, very adaptable. So statewide, maybe a little bit more abundant in the southern half of the state. Definitely by all stretch of the means, it's an upland species. You know, it doesn't like the water. Like sun, like, you know, tough conditions. It's, you know, a good eager tree to fill in any difficult kind of growing condition. And in those places, you'll find it next to white oak, post oak, hickories, you name it. And then lastly, we'll probably end it here with our northern red oak. The northern red oak is, you know, it's also definitely in the top list of oak trees. It's maybe like number 5, I think, most common oak in the state. In the fall time, they can get like a beautiful crimson color, beautiful like crimson red color. Other years, it's kind of russets and browns, maybe some oranges. So really pretty trees. They can handle a little bit more shade than many other trees. So we're willing to kind of like get into a forest a little bit later in the game and kind of hang out and tolerate and you know, and catch up when they get the opportunity. Red oak, northern red oak, could be found like well up into Canada. It grows like well around the lake states. It's like one of the most northern species that we've got. So you'll find them in Canada, a really tough hardy plant. And they also grow down like in the panhandle, like in Florida and Georgia. So really tremendous amount of like range and potential. And it's all, you know, unique species within there or genotypes and stuff, but they fill the gaps. So statewide in the state of Missouri, just about every county, number 5 abundant oak species. And they like it right in the middle. So they don't like it too wet. They don't do dry. They won't handle that. They're not all that tough. Pretty adaptable otherwise. They do like cool conditions. I associate red oak, northern red oak, as like a true forest species. So when you see a forest and it looks healthy and clean, and there's big trees, you could kind of guess there's thick soils underneath it, and a lot of diversity in the forest canopy and stuff like that. Northern red oak is going to be there, and it's going to play well with others. It's going to do well. It's going to provide habitat. It's going to provide mast and forage and foliage for insects and animals to consume. It's a true forest species. And where you find it there, you might also see other oaks like white oak, sometimes black oak, all kinds of hickories. They all play well together. The tricky thing about all these oaks, if anybody's interested in oak and identification and stuff like that, is we've got all these like unique species, and all these species they like each other. Oaks are kind of known as one of the most promiscuous species of all the forestries in the state of Missouri. So they tend to like hybridize, and they tend to get like a lot of different varieties. So all these white oaks have the potential to hybridize with other white oaks, and all the red oaks can hybridize amongst their particular group too. There's a particular tree in the state of Missouri that's like very common, and it's studied and been documented and named Quercus hawkiensis. So it's the red oak black oak hybrid. Does it look more like a red oak? Does it look more like a black oak? I don't know. It's like a little bit of both of them. So you'll find in a mix, whatever forest you get into, whatever like range you kind of run into, you'll find trees that look like other ones, and it's because they're unique amongst themselves, but also share those parentages and lines and lineages with their oak trees, and that's how they adapt. That's how they conquer new lands. It's how they adapt to the soils that they're in, and kind of find their way in the world. So I know I'm well past my time here, but I think that's all I got for you guys tonight. So appreciate you inviting me out here and get a chance to talk about oaks. Yeah.
So you were talking, I know I've heard that about oaks with hybridizing. Is there any research being done like with DNA, so maybe for new species of oaks that are evolving because of this hybridization?
All the time, like it's. Oh yeah. Yeah, she asked about, is there, let me just paraphrase, is there much research being done about like hybridization and like species that come out of that and where that goes? Like it's a big topic. So a lot of the hybrid names were really studied. People really, decades ago, maybe like 50, 60 years ago, people were really focused on like studying like the morphological features of trees and flowering plants in general. So people kind of like really started to realize that there were all these flowering plants, in early 1900s, and they started naming all these hybrid plants and stuff like that. And that continued well throughout the 1900s. And I think late 1900s, it like slowed down. So people stopped really like naming these as much. But however, like the science for the research got more into the genetics and, kind of understanding the lineage, what they call like the phylogeny, like the evolution of all these different species. And there's been a tremendous amount of research and understanding gained in that field in more recent years. So as far as like the study of oaks and the science of oaks, like people are really interested in studying like the species and its genetics and like where they came from, like how they evolved, and like how the oaks have split off into these different groups and went to so many different regions of the globe and settled into those areas and particularly took those over. So a lot of the good research that you read about, like learning about the hybrids and the identifiable characteristics, most of that is like decades old. But it's easy to approach, though. It's easier to approach, counting like the hairs on the bottom of leaves and looking at those little, unique features. Not everybody has like a genetics lab in their basement, so a little bit easier to digest that stuff. But it is kind of fascinating, though. But it's super geeky level, like oak stuff, if you get it. Get into it. If you like that kind of junk. Yes, sir.
So late summer, early fall, squirrels will get up in the oak trees. They'll chew off the limbs and they'll drop to the ground.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
You kind of answered your own question.
Later.
Yeah. Only a squirrel knows for sure, right? So squirrels are, I mean, as much as I understand it, like squirrels are rodents. You know, they like to chew on stuff. If they're not chewing on your tree, they might be chewing on like your aluminum fence or like your gutters or whatever else. So like they're rodents, so their teeth are always growing, so they've got to chew on things to, you know, to kind of ease that neurotic like sensation in the back of their minds. But they also get, you know, they do get sustenance from it, right? So they are consuming like starches in the wood, and like they'll eat like a little bit. It's not the biggest part of their diet, but they are consuming like little bits of like food in them. They'll eat like insects and stuff that are within branches. So if like anybody familiar with like oak galls, you know, there's like insects inside of there, and those insects are releasing pheromones and stuff. So squirrels are curious, you know, like what's inside of that, and like how does it taste, and like what can I do to ease my anxieties by chewing my half my day away. But I definitely understand how frustrating it is to live with an oak tree that's got, you know, population of squirrels in it, and you know, squirrel parts. Why they like that? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're like rodents, like so rabbits and, you know, like any other rodent species, like beavers, you know, those are rodents. They all have to just eat, you know, they've got to chew. Otherwise, like they're like you said, their incisors will grow inside of their skulls, and that's something that they want to avoid, I guess. But yeah, you know, so I mean, they've evolved with trees, right? They evolved to like to live inside of trees. They're more equipped to climb trees than any other animal, and, you know, find hollows and cavities and thrive in those conditions. So like they're kind of part of the picture. They're doing what they were meant to do. They're living their best lives, like out in the world. Yeah, there are, yeah, for sure. And they, you know, they eat. So the other thing is like they eat a lot of acorns, right? And acorns are loaded with omega-3s. You know, squirrels are very nutritious. Like they're basically like the salmon of the sky. That's what the people down south tell me about them anyway. So they have a high omega-3 content in their body fats and stuff.
I'll remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. Squirrel season's long. It goes from yeah. Oh yeah. You got to follow up, like, please.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Go
so,
ahead. Okay.
not Missouri, but when I was in school in North Carolina, there were guys that were in forestry program, and they were, you know, Georgia was well known, I guess, for hardwoods.
Mhm.
So what hardwoods would they be interested in Georgia? Why? What,
We're good.
oaks or white oaks?
Yeah, I mean, Georgia's got a pretty, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so Georgia, I'll just paraphrase if you don't mind. Georgia's got a tremendous like forestry economy, and it's also very diverse. There's a lot of interesting woods and stuff out there. And it is kind of like Missouri, you know, it's hardwood country, but they do have a lot of pine species as well down south. Ecologically, and like also from a forestry perspective, you know, that's a big part of their economy. So hardwoods are tremendous down in southeast Missouri. They have a lot of oaks. They have a lot of these southern oak species, none of which we really talked about here. But there's a lot of things like Quercus pagoda, Quercus falcata. So these southern oak species that are really, really highly tremendously like fast growing species and big timber species. So a lot of hardwoods in those regions. Ecologically, Georgia has a lot more diversity, you know, than like we do like in Missouri and, you know, maybe like Arkansas and stuff like that. So it's kind of a diversity hotspot. So there also is a lot of like rare, unusual oak species in that part of the country that you don't find in other regions. So there's a lot more like particular like niches and little voids that rare species have kind of settled into, and, you know, have thrived in, and in some cases, because they're rare, they're kind of at the last stage of their game. So more threatened species. So from the study of oaks, you know, from like a conservation standpoint, like everything that goes on in Georgia is very, very interesting. So they've got it. There's a lot of, I think, a lot of fronts been made and like trying to balance the two of those, you know, to study like how can we preserve these like rare plant species and rare plant communities, but also still have, you know, an economy, like a thriving economy where you could balance like timber and timber industries with in producing like paper and like pulp, you know, wood and, you know, and all timbers and stuff like that. And then and grow like successful, like, you know, preservation areas and small plant communities.
And one more question,
Sorry.
Amy, you had.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last slide.
Alan.
Yeah, you hinted at something about the pin oaks, and I wonder why they have such bad press. I like the ones that are.
Yeah. Yeah, I really can't like, I would never like slam any particular. Thank you. Yeah. So just a gentleman asked about the pin oaks and they have this kind of bad reputation, you know, and I really can't speak negatively about pin oaks. It's one of these, it's actually a really decent tree species. It's just been overplanted. So pin oak in particular is, it's a bottomland species, and like generally bottomland species like are pretty tough. They're adaptable. So they could grow in like tough conditions, like anaerobic conditions, and they tend to grow a little faster. So they thrive in pretty, you know, pretty rough areas, which makes for them to be like really good for using as like a street tree. That's generally how people select out many trees, like street tree species and stuff like that. So unfortunately for pin oak, it got too good that people were overplanting them. And that's the reason why we have like a tremendous pin oak tree population, like in our cities and suburbs and stuff like that. So it's not really the pin oak's fault that it's genetically, you know, fits this game. It's just been overplanted. It was too good at doing what it does. The pin oak, like many other species, has a limit. Pin oak was largely planted after World War II as like the urban population and stuff like that started growing westward and expanding, and we got suburbanization and stuff like that. So it became one of those trees that people could use because it was cheap, it was abundant, and it was easy to grow, and it grew pretty fast. So right now, in our like street tree population in St. Louis, there's a ton of pin oak trees that were planted in the, you know, the 50s and the 60s and stuff like that. And they're just getting to be that age where they're like, you know, 70, 80, 90-year-old trees. And, you know, pin oaks can grow to be 150 years old, but, you know, the last couple decades, like they might have some problems. They might have, you know, hollow cavities and insect and disease issues, and, you know, they might have some soil issues and stuff like that. So, you know, maybe we just don't plant as many pin oaks for a while, but there'll be a time again, I think, maybe not now, but like in 20, 30 years that people are going to look around in the urban forest and be like, where'd all the pin oaks go? You know, maybe we should plant some more pin oaks. So if anything, like, you know, I think the point I was trying to make earlier is like, we don't just plant one species. We got to like figure out a way to plant them all. Like diversity is a solution, but it only works like when you practice it, when you plant, you know, all the different oak species, and don't rely on just one of them to do all the heavy lifting, but like, you know, share the space and work well together.
Amy, go ahead.
Not sure. You go to the last slide.
Real quick question. I am losing a giant shingle oak. It's probably 100 years old. And just, you know, it's huge. It had two big giant and stuff that fell off of it. So I want to replace it with oaks. So I'm just going to wonder what distance apart would be a good distance to plant them? To sort of replace that one that's, I mean, it's all by itself.
Yeah.
But what would you suggest for plant, if I want to plant more than one?
My suggestion is yes, for sure. So you have an old pin oak tree, 100 years, so that's got to be a tremendous like width, canopy height, and all that stuff. It's shingle oak, and you're looking for a replacement, possibly multiple replacements. Like, what are some general guidelines Yeah, long-term planning, whatever you put in the ground, like just think about what it's gonna look like in, 50 years from now or 30 years from now. I wouldn't hesitate to plant like in some cases, like 3 trees, knowing that maybe one of them may not survive, or you could, remove one. If your idea is to create shade, like you could plant 3 trees and then in 20 years have shade. And then you can always cut one down. Like it's not an unheard of to cull a tree out to, to free things up, or to consider planting one of them as like a nurse tree that's going to aid the other one so they can grow taller and straighter and grow, higher into the canopy above. But I think thinking about like what you can plant and where, like think about your soils and like what's available there. If you have like thick soils, deep soils, it doesn't matter what type, clay, loam, silt, sand, whatever. As long as they're thick and they can have a lot of volume and support, a tree, then plant more. You can always err on the side on more. And then if you're thinking about species, again, I just plug in diversity too. Maybe a red oak and maybe a white oak in there. We all should be thinking about posterity and planning for the future. So white oaks, are definitely the kind of long-lived species that have played that long game. Post oaks will hopefully have a future, in the county, but only if people continue to plant them. They're not going to just fill up on their own. So, mix it up. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me out.
Glad y'all were able to come tonight. We just